I have a question. Now, wait, has anybody else got their new Christmas shirt on? New Christmas sweater? Christmas socks? Surely there's some of that, right? That's what this Sunday's for. So Christmas is amazing for a lot of us. It's sad for a lot of us. It's kind of the end of the year thing, but it happens every year. In 24, did you expect? We had like 7 baptisms. That's pretty cool. First 2 was Patience and Ryan. We didn't expect that. We didn't expect them to come in and do the things they've done. We've been blessed. We didn't expect that. We didn't expect when we said, hey, we want to get $60,000 in 60 days, that we'd really do that. But it happened. And we said we're going to update our parsonage without money. We're going to update our building here. Well, we did a job in the parsonage. It's beautiful. So Borger family living there now. We've painted the foyer, the hallway, and we still got some $27,000 left in that account, and we're going to plan on painting in here, changing up here. I don't know if there's enough money to do that, because if you didn't know this, Chuck, everything's expensive today. It just takes a lot of money to do anything. So we see that the Lord has a plan, and we're going to try everything we can to work His plan. We expected Him to work in 24. We believe that He did. You've seen the changes. You've seen the way that works. And maybe you're real happy about it. Maybe you're a little bit hesitant about it. I'm not sure. Let's talk about something today that's dear to my heart. How many of you like chili? Chili soup? Yeah, all them hands are up. Okay? Do you put pasta in your chili? Oh, there's a big yes. There's a big no. See, that's optional in some households, some not so much. Do you put in there kidney beans, black beans, chili beans? All those? You have your favorites. Some people like hamburger all scrunched up. Some like it chunky. I was at a restaurant downtown Winchester that I like ordering soup. Right now, today, this could change tomorrow, but my favorite soup is in the area is Wick's. Wick's have good chili. Okay, but anyway, it's not an advertisement. It's just anyway, I ordered chili downtown Winchester, and when they brought it to me, it was like white chili. Now, I like white chili. I make white chili, but I was not expecting it. And I was a little taken back, but I thought, okay, I'll eat it. It turned out to be really, really good. And it's funny because the table behind me, when I was about done, asked the waitress, is today chili dark or is it white chili? And the waitress said, I'll have to go check. I thought, no, I can tell you. But it's a neat surprise. Now, years ago, 50 years ago, my mother was having challenges with her kids getting married and couldn't come for Thanksgiving. It was very important to her to have. So she designated Friday after Thanksgiving, 6 o'clock, we're going to have chili at her house. Just come. If you can come, bring desserts, salads, whatever. But she's making the chili. We're not there for the chili. We're just there for the family and to get together and make it easy. She started that every year, 6 o'clock Friday after Thanksgiving. It's there. So a couple years ago, 3 years ago, my mom's making chili. She's getting a little forgetful. She forgets to put beans in the chili. Well, it still works. But after that, we did it, and then we had to sell her house, and my sister had the chili supper at her house, and it was fine. But last year we lost my sister, so what do we do with this tradition? So my sister's husband and 3 kids said, no, we're going to have it at the house. Who's going to make the chili? Well, took a little poll. We had 6 crock pots of chili. 6 different configurations of chili. I'm telling you, as my mother knew, It's not about the chili. See, our family is no different than most of yours. We've grown this last year. I had a couple weddings, had this new baby. He's quite a hit in the family. And our family's like, we got these quiet folks sitting over here, real quiet. They'll talk to you if you go talk to them, but they're not. We got these other folks who are loud and talk to everybody in the room. And as my brother points out, wouldn't you hate to marry into this family and try to get to know everybody? It's a challenge, right? So I want to talk about that the Apostle Paul, he knows a lot about it. Not chili. Because it's not about chili. The Apostle Paul knows about church. And he writes to the church. He says, Church at Corinth, I love you. I've been gone for a while. You are struggling. I'm going to write a letter back to you, and I'm going to encourage you. And if you read this, we've gone through some of this in the very first chapter. The Apostle Paul says, Church, I want you to remember 3 things you are. You are holy. Not because of anything you did, but because of something Christ did. He died. Therefore, you can come to God, because Christ died for your sins. You can come before God as a sinful person, because God couldn't look at your sin before, but through Christ, you now can. So now you're holy, or righteous, as the term is interacted. He says you're holy. He says you're united. It doesn't matter what gender you are, what race you are, doesn't matter where you've been in the past, you're united because of Christ. Well, we're united as a church in one thing, Jesus. Keep that focus, and everything else works out. Then he says you have wisdom. Paul states this in his letter. He says you can have the wisdom of men. It'll take you quite a way. Or you can have the wisdom that comes from God. That's the wisdom I want you to have. And he writes that quite a bit about that wisdom from God thing. It's in there if you want to read it. And then he tells us one that I dearly love, and I know it's humorous to most of it. He says, but the trouble, church, is you're a bunch of big babies. You're still drinking milk. I'm trying to feed you steak. So I'm asking you to mature. I'm asking you to grow up. Wisdom will do that for you. Understanding the holy part and the united part will do that for you. Then he goes into this discourse from about chapter 4 on, and he tells you how to live your life. He says, you want to know about lawsuits? Read that. He says, you want to know about sexual sin? Read that. You want to know about marriage? Read that. You want to know about idolatry? Having something before Christ, something that's more important than Christ? I'll tell you about that. Read that. If you're struggling with any of that, he says, here it is. I'm going to write. You want to know about the Lord's Supper? He says, read that. You want to know about spiritual gifts? It's in here. He says, you want to know about speaking in tongues? It's in here. You want to know about orderly worship? I'll write it for you. If you today want to know about those things in the church, go to 1 Corinthians, read it. He really outlines it so nicely, and sometimes we read it and it's like chili. Hey, I don't really like that part in my chili. So we try to change it. Now, this is kind of a side note. My wife never likes my chili. I'm sorry she's not here today, so I'll talk to her about this. She never really liked my chili. But what to my mom's thing, I fixed the chili. And on the way home that night, my wife said, I had your chili and it was really good. Well, and the next day she ate the chili again. Chili is often better the second day. And even the day after that, I thought, wow, last week my wife's been sick. She said, I'd really like some chili tomorrow. Like, she's asking me to make the chili. Now, either my chili's changed, or her taste have changed, or maybe there's just a blend there together. Paul says that about the church, doesn't it? This whole thing here, the longest chapter in 1 Corinthians is chapter 15. For 57 verses, Paul talks about resurrection of the dead. He talks about Jesus' resurrection from the dead. Jesus died. He was in the grave. He rose again. So he could be something. He could be our Savior. Then he says, guess what? That's just the first fruits of what's going to happen to you. There's going to be a death, and nothing really changes and grows until it dies, and then you're going to have this spiritual body. You want to know about life after that? Right there it is in 1 Corinthians 15. He does a marvelous job of putting this in there. And sometimes we read it and we say, well, that's not what I read. That wasn't the directions when I was making chili. It's not about chili. Apostle Paul knows what he's talking about. He's given us directions, and he's saying it as clear as he can. He's writing something to the church as a unified group of believers, individuals who come together to worship under one united under Christ. We can learn from him every day, every time we read this text. Every time we have a question, we should go in here and find it. The answer's here. So this little verse today, 58 of chapter 15. He says, so my dear brothers and sisters, be strong. Be immovable. Steady. Always enthusiastic about the Lord's work, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless. That's how he closes out. He's talking directly about you can be strong, and we use the word immovable here. In the New Living it says steady, and I've used that in your outline if you want to follow along with that. Be strong, be steady, be enthusiastic, and be sure that nothing you do for the Lord is ever wasted, is ever useless, is ever not seen. Paul says that in direct reference to all those 57 verses. He just talked about resurrection of the dead, but he's also talking about those 14 chapters he did ahead of this. He sums it up in this one little verse, and then 16 is about kind of like his instructions in the final way as he's signing off. He's like a lot of preachers, you know. Takes a chapter just to say this is the end. No. Paul's awesome. He understands our needs. He understands our need as a church. First off, he says, be strong. You know, what's that? Be strong. Is that be strong like so you can bench press 300 pounds? I doubt it. Be strong emotionally. Maybe. Be strong spiritually. He's telling the church, if you do all these things that we just talked about, you will be strong. You'll be somebody strong. I write down a verse here for you if you care to read that in the future. Moses, who's 120 years old, he's been leading Israel. I don't know if he's leading, we call it wandering in the desert for 40 years, but Moses is their leader. They're wandering because of disobedience 40 years ago. When God says you're going to go into the promised land, he brings them in from the south side, and they said, no, we're afraid of those giants there. We can't do it. See? They didn't expect near enough from God. So God says, fine, you just wander around the desert for 40 years until all the old guys are dead, and then we'll bring you back around the east side, and we'll bring you in that way. Your attitude will be different. Moses says, the Lord will hand you over to the people who live there. You will deal with them as I've commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God will go ahead of you. He will never fail you nor forsake you. He will never change. Same story. Moses is saying, I'm not going into the promised land, but you are. Joshua's going to lead you. Do not be. What are you afraid of? Do you ever answer that question? Do you ever look at that? Do you ever think about that? I'll tell you a little joke here. I'm sorry to my family, but I have to. Guy goes to a psychiatrist. He says, I have this terrible fear of elevators. I just can't go to a building and get in the elevator. I have a terrible fear. And the psychiatrist says, well, we have steps to avoid that. Now that's a joke, folks. Because that's the thing we do wrong. We avoid our fears. When we know, psychologists know, counselors know, we have to face our fears or our fears will control us. What are your fears? What's your fears? Are you afraid to order soup because it may not have the right beans in it? Are you afraid in your church that it may not go the way you want it to go? Be strong. What's God saying here through the hand of Paul? Be strong. Be steady. Be immovable. What's that mean? 1 Corinthians 10:13. Here's what he's just a few pages back from where we were. If you think you're standing strong, be careful, for you too may fall into the same sin. So he's talking about a sin of idolatry here, which he's talking about. We don't always think that we put something ahead of God. But Paul says, be careful, because maybe you do. But remember that the temptations that come into your life are no different from Remember that the temptations that come into your life are no different from what others experience. God is faithful. He will keep the temptation from becoming so strong that you can't stand up against it. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you will not give in. So, my friends, flee from the worship of idols. Oh, we do set our idols. We do. And we get so used to it. You know, it's like the nautical guidance of a ship. We set our longitude, we set our latitude, and we say, steady the course. Focus on that course. When you're out in the middle of the ocean, you see nothing but water and sky. You set your course according to the compass and you stay with it. Paul says you set your course on Christ and you stay with it. What's your job? What's the job of the church? What's the mission of the church? I don't know. Probably not about chili, is it? He says you should be enthusiastic. I love this part. You should be, and I give a reference here from 2 Corinthians 9. He's talking to the church about, we were collecting offering for the church of Jerusalem. Jerusalem church is struggling. They need funds. And the church at Corinth helped. And he says, your enthusiasm helped other churches. Enthusiasm sells, doesn't it? People love to follow a winner who's enthused. Downers turn people away. Do you have trouble? I struggle here because people ask me, they heard about this 60 for 60 and I almost get prideful. But I say, no, the church came through. I'm enthused about it. Not prideful. Enthused. Who in the world would have thought that First Church would be given a large inheritance from a wonderful family here in town, and then we have an obligation to do something with? We expected that. But we have an obligation. It's a gift that we are obligated to. Are we enthused? Are we humbled? Oh, all those. All those. But we are accountable to do something with that. Enthusiasm sells. What has been given to us is entrusted to us to use in a good way. God has blessed us for our faithfulness. I hope so. I hope so. Now look at this last one. Be sure that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless. This year, each and every person baptized here was because of dear saints who've been here for 50 years and you've stayed faithful. Everything you did, you have a part in every baptism that comes here now. Everything you did in the past, be it open a door, be it giving, be it singing, whatever it is. The Apostle Paul relates to this in such a powerful way. Nothing you do is useless. Nothing. I think we should be reminded of this every way. Been faithful for years. Everything you did has a reason. You ever go back and read John 3? Nicodemus, very powerful man in the Jewish community, comes to Jesus at night. He says, I know you're a prophet, man. I can tell by the way you talk. But how do I get to heaven? And Jesus says, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus is a smart guy. But he says, that's just not possible. It's not possible. And Jesus says, oh yeah. Born again by water and spirit. It takes both. Nicodemus is bewildered, so he doesn't follow Christ at that time. But after Christ dies, Nicodemus comes to the leaders and says, I want that man's body. I'm going to take care of it. Something he did. Nothing's useless. Nicodemus decided to be somebody that followed Christ. Matthew 6. Jesus says, in your prayer time, go to your closet and pray in secret. And what you do in secret, my Father sees public. Nothing you do is useless. Every prayer, every act of service, everything you do has purpose. You know, Satan takes our eyes off the prize. Satan will divert us. He will put us thinking over here. He will put us with divisions among us. Satan always tries to divert the true issue. I tell you, it's not about chili. It's about making disciples to be something for the kingdom. It's real. As our praise team comes today, we expected more. I believe it's here. Let me read this to you, if I could, from James. One time, several years ago, I had a guy preach from the book of James, and he said, you ought to read that every day for 30 days. It's only 5 chapters. You can read it every day. And I thought, I think I can memorize it. I think I could put this whole book to memory. As I tried to do that, I realized so many times I'd read it, and I'd think, did I read that before? Because it kind of comes across different. Maybe my life is in a different place. Maybe, I don't know. But this week, it's this one. I went back to just try. That's a good challenge. If you have a Bible reading plan for this coming year, it's great. But if you just take one book of the Bible, focus on that. 1 Corinthians, my favorite, as you know, is Romans. James is awesome. Here's what he says in James 3. If you're wise and understand God's ways, live a life of steady goodness, so that only good deeds will pour forth. If you don't brag about the good you do, then you will be truly wise. But if you are bitterly jealous, there's selfish ambition in your heart, don't brag about being wise. That's the worst kind of lie. For jealousy, selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and motivated by the devil. For wherever there's jealousy, selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every kind of evil. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. It's also peace-loving, gentle at all times, willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and good deeds. It shows no partiality and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of goodness. Wisdom. We all have it. We just choose where we find it. Would you stand with me? Expect more in 24.